Hello, it's long time no see for some of you. Well, good evening, everybody. Most of you have your Zoom, you have your names on Zoom on your screen. If you don't, if you could just do me a favor and just rename yourself so we can get to know each other a little bit, that would be great. You can do that by just putting your cursor over the upper right-hand corner of your box where your face is and the three dots. You can go down and rename yourselves. And I've enabled you to rename here just now. So, yes.
God, I don't know where the dots are, but it's not working for me.
Okay.
Not for me either.
Okay. I'll try it again. I'll uncheck, rename, and check. So we'll see if that helps. Hopefully that doesn't mess
You
up.
can rename him anything you want. You have that power because you're running the meeting. So go ahead and hover over his box and name him Sir Dan Lee or something.
Well, I can do that. That's true.
If you go to participants and then you click on your name, there'll be a more tab and you can rename there.
Yeah.
The only problem is I can't find Sir Dan Lee in the participants.
Sir Dan Lee. Oh,
he's not in there.
Let's see, Marion. Getting there. Okay, so here. Okay, a couple more people for Okay, we're getting close. I'm taking attendance as we go here. I think we're. Okay, well, we have a full agenda tonight. We set aside an hour for this meeting this evening, and we have a lot of ground to cover actually in this hour. This meeting here of our budget advisory group is intended to be an orientation. I really want to thank you for participating. It's great to have you here tonight and be part of this process. I'm going to talk a little bit about the purpose of this group in just a few minutes when we talk about the board charge. But really, there's three parts to this meeting tonight, and we have three main goals. One is we want to, well, four really. First, we're going to take a minute to just introduce ourselves very quickly. There's a lot of people here, so we aren't going to be able to spend a lot of time with introductions, but we do want to go down and have you say your name, go around and have you say your name and your relationship to the school district. Then what we're going to do is just talk for a few minutes about the budget advisory process itself, what it involves, talk a little bit about the board charge, which hopefully you've had an opportunity to look over. And then we're going to talk a little bit about school funding. Sarah is going to walk us through, Sarah Santani, our Executive Director of Finance, is going to talk a little bit about school funding and how this gets us our money and kind of how that plays out in terms of the ways that we can use it. And then we're going to spend some time at the very end talking a little bit about the current levy proposition that's on the ballot. We're just going to get a light touch on that tonight. But what we did want to do is make sure we talked about the funding issues primarily tonight so you can understand kind of how we get our funding, because that's going to be really important when we think about how we use our funding. And that conversation is going to be the focus of the second meeting, again, which I'll get into in a minute when we talk about the meetings. So I'm not going to talk a lot more about this meeting tonight until we get into the presentation. But let's first take a moment to introduce ourselves. If we could just go around, I'll start it off. And then maybe because there's a lot of us, when you say your name, maybe what you could do is down below, go down to reactions, and then just do a thumbs up when you've said your name. That way we'll know that you've gone already, and then we can identify who gets to go next. So I'm Scott Peacock, I'm superintendent, and I'm just very thankful that you're all here tonight. Let's go next to Dan Lee. Partially introduced Dan.
I'm Daniel Lee. I'm the Executive Director of Human Resources and Student Support.
Can you pick somebody, Dan?
On my screen, Jeanette is right next to me. So we'll go with Jeanette.
I'm Jeanette Grisham. I'm the principal at Lakewood High School, and I will go with Con and Luce.
I forgot how to unmute. I'm Conan Luce. I teach Spanish at Lakewood High School. Tina Bustad.
Tina Bustad, I am in HR and also a parent. And we'll go with Tony.
Hi, I am Tony Cristiano and I teach third grade at LES. I will go with Megan Stalker.
I'm Megan Stalker. I teach fourth grade at Cougar Creek.
I'm Brian Toutant. I'm the Executive Director of Teaching and Learning. Anna Oos.
Thanks, Brian.
Hi, I'm Anna Oos, and I have an 8th grader and a junior at Lakewood School District.
Baldeep Singh, I'm the Information Systems Manager. Bill Landry.
Bill Landry, principal of Cougar Creek Elementary. Miss Underhill.
I'm Linda Underhill and I teach at the middle school, and I've been with Lakewood for 25 years in one capacity or another, and I've sent 4 children through Lakewood. So I'm recognizing some names. And I'll go with Tony K.
Sorry, my reaction didn't stay up. I already went, but I will call on Kelsey Mitchell.
I'm Kelsey Mitchell. I'm the district nurse for Lakewood, and I'll call on Patty.
Hi, I'm Patty Buchanan. I'm the assistant principal at Lakewood Middle School. It's fun to see your little guy there, Kelsey. So I will go with Annie McCann.
Hi, I'm Annie McCann. I'm a community member and I've had a kid in Lakewood School District for 25 years straight. So a lot of kids through there. So, oopsie.
I guess I'll go. I'm Laura Hudson. I'm the EBD teacher at the elementary school levels, and I'm a community member. I have 2 sons that have graduated from Lakewood and are in college now, and I will pass it on to Angela Lorai.
I'm Angela Lorai, and I teach 3rd grade at LES. I will pass it on to Dale Leach.
Thank you, Angela. My name is Dale Leach. I am the Executive Director of Learning Support and Operations for the district. I was also the high school principal for 7 years and had a son graduate from Lakewood High School. I will pass it on to David Parks.
Hi, my name is David Parks, a community member as well. I have 2 kids in Lakewood School District. One's a sophomore and one is in the 5th grade. And just here to help out and look forward to the program tonight. So I will comment real quick. I can't see much. I am on my personal phone driving home, and so I'll be hopping off the video, but we'll be listening in. Thank you.
I can jump in. I'm Kim Caldwell, principal at Lakewood Elementary School, and I will pass it off to Sarah Letelier.
I'm Sarah Letelier, and I'm a paraeducator at Cougar Creek, 23 years. I've graduated 4 Lakewood graduates, and I'm the president of our PSC union. Oops, sorry. Gosh, looking on my screen, Marianne.
Hi, I'm Marianne Legore. I'm a math teacher at Lakewood High School, and I have 2 boys at the high school. One's a senior and one's a sophomore. Casey Zachary.
Hi, I'm Casey. I teach at LHS, and I will pass it off to Jeff Sowards.
Hi, I'm Jeff Sowards, and I am a community member. Both of my daughters graduated from Lakewood High School, and I teach social studies at LHS and coach cross country and track. I came in late, so I don't know who's gone. I haven't heard and I can't see, but is that a Dan Green? Dan Green, you're up.
Yeah, this is Dan Green. I'm with facilities. I've been with the district 40 years, and I have graduated 2 children from Lakewood. And I don't know who's left either.
So maybe we could hear from Rob Dietz. Give it. Oh, Mr. Dietz, you're on mute.
Okay, I'm sorry. Good evening. I'm Rob Dietz, community member. Been around this part for about 30 years. got two kids through Lakewood School K to 12, actually one K to 9 or 10, and then she went to Arlington High. And I'm just happy to participate and hope I can contribute to problem solving.
Yeah. Thanks, Rob.
Welcome.
Few people we haven't heard from yet. I think Dana. How about Dana Krieger?
Hi, I'm Dana Krieger. I have 3 kids at Lakewood. Actually, one just graduated last year. And then I also have a daughter in 11th grade and a daughter in 8th grade. And they're active in all kinds of activities and sports and band. So yeah, I appreciate the opportunity to help out. So let's see. It's kind of a test now to see.
Yeah.
How about Julie Harrison?
Hi, Julie Harrison. I work at the Lakewood School District Facility Admin, and I will be honest too, I'm on the road, so I'm not hearing everybody, but I appreciate the opportunity as well. And I have 2 kids in the community that are attending Lakewood School as well. I will pass it off to, I can't see who should go next, so I'll volunteer whoever wants to go next.
How about Jenny Egger? I don't think we've heard from Jenny yet.
Hi, I'm Jenny. I'm a parent and community member, and apologize, I'm in the car at baseball practice, so I'm having a hard time seeing who's next too.
Okay, I think we're at the point where we're just going to have to go with people who know they haven't gone yet. Just jump in, unmute, and introduce yourselves.
All right. Well, I'm Steve Larson. I am a school board director and got 2 kids in 5th and 6th grade, or 2 nephews actually.
I'm Amy Varellen Grubbs, and I serve as the Director of Teaching and Learning for Lakewood School District.
I'm Sarah Santani. I'm the Executive Director of Finance at Lakewood.
I think we have everybody. Awesome. Thanks again, everyone, for being here. We're going to jump right in because I want to respect your time and make sure that we get done as close to 7 as possible. Get done a little early, that's good too. But Sarah, if you could go ahead and share your screen, we're going to go ahead and jump right into the presentation. So as I said earlier, there's 3 parts to this presentation. Sarah and I are going to jump back and forth a little bit and tag team a few things as well, I suppose. That's kind of how it flows around here. But if you could jump to the next slide, Sarah, that would be great. So the Budget Advisory Committee is tasked with, we're tasked with identifying some priorities that will shape how we make reductions in our budget of $2.5 million for the next school year, which is the 2021-22 school year. What we've done is identified 4 broad areas within the school district to do that. There's literally thousands of line items in a budget, and there's virtually no way we could, in any orderly way, go through all those line items in the budget. So we've organized it into 4 areas that tend to be tend to cover most of the key expenditures in the district over the course of a year: facilities, activities and athletics, teaching, learning, and special services, and then programs, staffing, and administration. The board charge actually identified administration and governance separately, but we combined that into the programs and staffing so that we would have one kind of meatier area of the budget to look at for our group. So the advisories in these 4 areas are going to discuss recommendations, review. We'll talk a little bit more detail how that's going to work, but really discuss and present recommendations to the whole group, which will then pull together and will then inform the actual budgeting process undertaken by the administration and presented to the board. So I'm just going to leave it at that for now, and we'll get further into this in a minute. So the budget advisory charge from the board, Sarah, can you pop that up, please? I'm not going to read this because hopefully you've had a chance to read it, and if not, you can read it yourselves. But the charge presented by the school district's board is that because we had a rejection in two levy elections last year of the renewal levy for educational programs and operations, we have this year reduced our budget by $1 million. But because we have not got a levy approved yet for the out years, 2022, 2023, and 2024, we have to budget right now around the assumption that we will not have that funding. We can't build a budget around money that we do not have. So at this point, what we're tasked with doing is reducing $2.5 million from our budget for the next school year. And as I shared, we've got 4 groups that are going to be meeting to discuss reductions in these 5 areas. And then what we will do is at the end of this process, which hopefully will be 3, possibly as many as 4 meetings, we will be in a place where we will be able to, you will have hopefully made recommendations to us about how you think the levy should be structured, where we should, or excuse me, the budget should be structured in terms of reductions, so that we then move forward knowing that we've engaged in a collaborative effort around what that looks like. It's very important when we're talking about budget reductions, the size of $2.5 million, to make sure that we engage the community in thinking about what's most important, because this is, as I like to say, this is not surgery here. We're talking about major cuts, which are more along the lines of, in many ways, amputations than they are surgery. So these are big cuts. So let's move on to the next slide. So in order to inform this process, we put together some guiding principles. And by we, what I mean is our cabinet group, which is me, Dan Lee, Dale Leach, Sarah Santani, Brian Toutant, and Amy Verellen Grubbs. They're our district level administration. They work with me to basically lead the district through the course of the year and making sure that we're adhering to the board's priorities and the priorities of our community. We put together 3 guiding principles that we felt would be important to inform our thinking as we move through this process. And one of the tricky things about guiding principles is that they sometimes compete with each other and require us to think about a balance and maintaining a balance between them. So these principles, recognizing that no levy collections for this year and next year potentially could impact 3 consecutive school years. That's the 2021 school year, the 2021-22 school year, and the 22-23 school year, because levies are collected in the spring and the fall. So they overlap between fiscal years, which means that we're looking at 3 years potentially where we're impacted by no levy collections. So as a result, we need to really think about the principles that will carry us through that time period in our decision making. The first one is that we want to make sure that we're doing our best to remove the reductions or keep the reductions as far from the classroom and the students as possible, given the realities. We're not going to be able to keep things away from the classroom when we're talking about $2.5 million, but how much can we keep away from the classroom is an important question. The second principle is, given available resources should be focused on preserving systemic and emergent needs. We know we have emergencies and we have to prepare to some degree for emergencies, but we also can't make reductions that inhibit our ability to function as a district. So for example, to create an obvious example, we can't cut out bus fuel. We've got to run buses. So, the question there might be, how much bus fuel do we cut? Or how much do we count on reducing certain things? That's part of the big question we have. And then the third bullet is, along with one-time expenditures, we can cut one-time expenditures that are not essential to the operations of the district, but we also need to think beyond one-time reductions, because if we're talking about possibly not having levy collections for 3 years, we have to think about making reductions that continue over 3 years so that we don't have to continually go back and make the same reductions over and over again or reach the end of our reductions. We want to make sure we balance that out so that we're cutting out those one-time expenditures that we can, but also cutting so that we can those budget cuts remain in place until a levy is approved. So hopefully that makes sense. Those are the three big ones anyway. And then what we've done is put together a schedule. Hopefully you've seen this in emails that you've gotten from the facilitators of your group. Tonight, we're doing our orientation, March 11th, 2 weeks from tonight. We've planned at least to meet from 6 to 8 p.m. This meeting is going to be in many ways the heart of our work because on March 11th, we're going to review and revise proposed budget priorities and recommend areas for reduction. So this is going to be the big meeting. March 18th, a week later, is going to be almost as big because what we're going to talk about is how the different budget recommendations that have been made have been put together as a whole set of reductions. We could meet individually as groups and make decisions, but what we know is a budget is a system. It's made of many parts. And so when you make a reduction in one area, it impacts reductions in other areas. Or if we don't make reductions in some areas, then we may have to make reductions in other areas in order to meet the goal of $2.5 million. So each area, each of these four groups, when you make recommendations, they're going to tie into the recommendations of another group. And in March 18th, we're going to talk about what that looks like so that you have the big picture and share some of the rationale for why we are where we are and explain how your priorities have affected the thought process. And then March 25th is a backup meeting in case we need it, in case we get pushed back and need another meeting in there. And as you've seen the makeup of the group through the introductions. We've really tried to give a range of participants an opportunity to share their perspectives. So Sarah's going to talk just very briefly about the timeline here of the whole budget development process.
Yeah, as you can see, we essentially are talking about budget almost all year. We start in December, starting to look and see what the next year is going to look like, evaluate how we've been doing during the current year. We're listening to and following the state to see what's going on in the legislature. We're also looking at any areas that we could see increases. For example, like maybe we know our insurance rates are going up next year. So we can start collecting all of those items to combine them into our next budget. We also last year and this year consulted with a demographer. Since we've had such changes in our community, we wanted to make sure that we're looking at birth rates and making sure that we're projecting our enrollment for our students, which actually drives our funding from the state, which we'll talk about a little bit later. So we wanted to make sure that our numbers are as accurate as possible, talking with those experts and then looking at our trends as well. We also are holding, after we look at our enrollment numbers, we look at it by building, and then we talk with our leaders by programs and buildings and look at staffing needs. And then we are also holding these budget advisory committee meetings to help us make decisions for the upcoming school year. And also looking towards our levy in April on the 27th. Once we've identified all of our priorities and hopefully know the outcome of the election, we can start forming and compiling our budget for the next year. And then ultimately it is presented to the board, they give us direction, and we adopt before the next school year.
So that's kind of the quick overview of our process and how this budget advisory process fits into the larger budget timeline. What questions do you have about this portion of our presentation? Or comments? It's okay too. Okay, we are going to send this PowerPoint out to you tomorrow, so you'll have it to review and refer back to. So you know, as we get into the kind of the more content about funding and revenue, you don't really feel like you have to take notes unless you want to. We'll send this out and you can take a look at it. So Sarah, do you want to go ahead and move forward into the, this piece I was going to share. So this slide right here actually presents the framework for the revenue section of the presentation. And we're going to highlight each of the pieces of the pie that you see in front of you right here on the screen. We're going to talk a little bit about, we're going to talk most about the general fund because that's the biggest part of our budget, 79.05 to be precise. That's the biggest part of our budget. And so in the absence of a levy collection, that becomes particularly important because we have to draw more on that state revenue than normal because of not having local levy dollars. The second largest part of the pie normally would be our local levy, which is about almost 16% of our budget. And then we have our federal funds, and we'll touch on that in a few minutes in more detail. And then we have local fees that come in from, say, county programs and other programs that we host or facilitate in our district. So that's kind of the quick overview, and we'll talk about each of those pieces of the pie here, and Sarah's going to walk you through that.
All right, so I'm going to go over this very high level, but we do have an additional resource. We're going to be sending out the 2021 Citizens Guide to K-12 Funding in Washington. So if you want to dive deeper into any of these topics when you're looking at the PowerPoint, feel free. So the state budget, state funds drive the district budgets. It is, like you saw in our pie chart from the previous slide, that it is the largest source of our funding. So the state has a complicated formula and it drives, or it's student enrollment driven, and it will chunk out staffing, programs, curriculum, supplies, services, etc. Prototypical model of it, exactly what they think that a normal school would look like, and they give you funding based on that. So in order to carry out the constitutional responsibility to produce or to provide education to Washington students, the legislature passed the Basic Education Act in 1977, which defined basic education by establishing goals, minimum program hours, teacher content hours, and a mix of course offerings for a school district to provide. Since then, there have been many changes to portions of the legislature around school funding, most recently the McCleary decision. So currently, the legislator uses the prototypical funding formula and it allocates to 3 primary groups: schools, district-wide support, and then central administration. And on average for this current school year, the statewide allocation is about $9,400 per student. And then for special education students, there's an additional about $10,000 for this school year. So this is just an example. Well, this is the model. There's many different tables of how the funding is actually chunked out. But for example, they base that for every 17 students, it generates, or they want the class size to be about 17. For grades 7 and 8, it's about 28. As well as 9 through 12. And then they give you additional funding if you provide career and technical education for middle school and high school. So those are vocational programs like robotics and coding, stuff like that. And we don't have a skill center, but we do use the lab science a smidge. So also they give us allocations, and you'll see a little bit more of this later when we talk about Lakewood's comparisons to this chart. But they're saying in a typical school, if you have 400 students, you would get 1.25 principals or administrators at an elementary school. So if you look at that, our schools are a little bit less than that. So we'd get about 1 per building. If you look at, let's see, school nurses, if you add all those up, it's about 0.3. we have actually less than 0.3. I think it's about 0.39 for our district. For school nurses, we actually employ 5, but the state is only funding us for way less than 1 of them. So how they've decided the funding will go is not necessarily matching our needs, and we'll kind of go into that a little bit more later on. This is one more example of district-wide support. So for technology, for every 1,000 students, you get about 2/3 of a technology worker. And the same goes for facilities and grounds and maintenance and laborers. There's different proportions based on how many students you have. And then there's something called MSOCs, which is materials, supplies, and operating costs. So it's everything except for staff, non-employee related costs. So for technology, for every student, you get $135. Last year, for this year, you get $138, for example. So there's technology for utilities and insurance, curriculum, textbooks, supplies, different services, facilities maintenance. And then there's additional funding for different programs, for example, CTE, which is the career and technical education. Also part of the prototypical model is other programs. We have special education, for example, learning assistance program, bilingual, highly capable. And then there's also pupil transportation, which is a whole nother formula, but just part of the other types of funding that the state provides us. I know that was a
Sarah,
lot.
can we
Yeah.
stop for just a second? Because I'd
Yep.
like to make sure we kind of bring this point home a little bit and have a chance to check in on this, because this is the biggest part of the portion around state funding that we have. In fact, this is the state funding. So what all this adds up to is these numbers that Sarah shared with you there, as she said, they're not all of the numbers that go into the formula. We couldn't possibly go through all the calculations or all those coefficients or whatever you want to call them tonight, those calculators. But what they do is all of those are scalable as you've gathered based on how many students we have. So if we have those students, then it's scalable either upward or downward in terms of the way the money is calculated. And then the state sends us that money basically, for lack of a better word, basically in a lump sum. I mean, this is a total calculation of state funding for the most part. I mean, I'm simplifying it a little bit. Sarah's probably saying, no, it's not quite that, but it's basically, it's a calculator for the money that we get. And so when we get that funding, it doesn't literally mean that we spend all that money on every one of those items that the state gives us the money for, because those are just what the state says, well, this is what a typical school would have. So we're going to use this number to generate an amount of money that goes to each school district. And then we get the money. And this is why you're here. We then have to prioritize how we spend that money. And in most cases, that money goes to the very things we get the money for. But in some cases, we don't have certain programs that the student has in the prototypical funding model. And in other cases, we have bigger programs. And so we have to then prioritize how we use that money so that it fits our local needs. But as you can gather from the way the proportions, because you don't have one psychologist in a building, you get like 0.007. I don't know how you get 7,000th of a psychologist in a building, but that's how the state figures the money. So we might have, then we decide, well, we're going to have 5 psychologists or whatever. And so we then we have to decide how much of that money comes from the state funding and then how much of it comes from local levy dollars. Because as you can tell, that money is all so fractional, it doesn't pay for everything. So that's where the levy dollars come into play. And then when there's the loss of levy dollars, then we have to reprioritize that pool of money that we get. I hope that makes sense, because it's tempting to look at those and say, well, we get this amount of money, we need to spend it on this, but that's not practically how we can budget in the district, because there's so many local priorities we have to address.
So I'll just go over one more, actually a couple more. Talking about federal funds, that was a small piece of our pie as well. We get some small pieces for special education. We also get special education's on there twice. We do get preschool and normal special education. We also get food service programs provided by the USDA. We also get a little bit for vocational programs. And then we also have some supporting services, some special grants.
And those, Sarah, they tend to be pretty well designated, right?
Yes, these are restricted
Category.
dollars. Yeah, they have specific guidelines that we have to meet in order to use the money.
Unlike the general, the money that we get for our general fund from the state, which we can spend in a fairly broad way, these do not fall in that same they don't function the same way.
Correct. And then we also have local funds. We do have a couple programs right now that Snohomish County sponsors. We have the ECAP program, which is for students that are younger than kindergarten. They come in, they're developmental. We also have some student support advocates that are helping out. We have a couple of those in our district this year, new to this year. We also do receive food service. In a typical year, we receive food service revenue. Some student fees, donations, and then facility use fees are some of the major categories. And this is a very tiny piece of our budget.
Okay, so before we talk a little bit about levies, do you have any questions about what we just shared regarding state funding? I know it's a lot to digest, so. And I think the important part here is that the details aren't necessarily all that important for our conversations. It's knowing that as we have to think about how the state funds us and with the reduction of levy revenue, how we may need to prioritize things in a different way. I like to put it this way. This is kind of the analogy that I use. It's kind of like if you have a dual income in your family and one member, let's see, the husband gets laid off. Now the husband's income and checking account may have paid for groceries. That doesn't mean obviously that you're not going to buy groceries. You're now going to have the wife's income pay for the groceries, and you're going to have to reprioritize around it. And that's exactly what we're tasked with doing, is figuring out how to reprioritize, knowing that there's fewer funds coming in at the local level. So that's going to be the big question. We're going to try to, where we're spending beyond state funding, we will have an opportunity to look at those, because those are areas that raise up to be areas where we might be able to focus cuts, because they are areas that where we've put more local funding into things. We may have to look at reducing that in order to minimize how we move other programs around. So we'll talk more about that in our next meeting. But basically, we're going to look at how to reprioritize, knowing how the state allocates money to us. So local funds fund local priorities. So the local, just a quick overview on levies. Levies need to be approved for exactly what we ask people to approve them for. So if we have a levy that's $6.1 million, we can only collect $6.1 million. We cannot collect it for any more. And if it's a 3-year levy, we can only collect the amount approved for 3 years. Levy measures can only be run twice in a calendar year. There's 4 elections where we can possibly run them: February, April, August, and November. Obviously, February, we just had that election option passed. So there's 3 remaining dates that we can run a levy this year. They can only be presented twice. And if they don't pass for whatever reason in that calendar year, then there cannot be a levy collection the following year, no matter what happens the following year. And if they're approved, then they can be collected for the following year, but only the following year, and then for the years after. Okay, we'll go to the next slide. Okay, and I talked about this. Levy schools collect only what voters approve. There's an interesting kind of question out there that's difficult to answer, but basically when property values go up in a district, the levy rates typically go down because what we collect in a levy is like one big pie that's made up of thousands of pieces of property, each with $1,000 increments. So if we say a levy rate is $1.80 per thousand, every person's house and every business is worth a certain number of thousands. And then if the property values go up, then that $1.80 per thousand goes down. So it's kind of a proportion. Think of it like a teeter-totter. It doesn't necessarily mean that people pay more or less, because the kinds of property that go up in value make a big difference. When a Costco gets built in Lakewood, that carries a bigger burden, a bigger part of the tax burden than before it existed. And so that actually can be something that can actually lower taxes. But if nothing is built and housing values only go up, then people's rates may go down, but their tax may still go up. So it's always a hard thing to be able to say for sure whether property values are going to mean a higher tax for people. They often do, but they sometimes don't. And that's just a question that's very difficult to navigate. It's complex. But it's out there. People talk about it, and it's something to be aware of. Okay, we'll go to the next slide. So the local educational the levy that's on the ballot now, and the biggest levy that we run typically, is the Educational Program and Operations Levy. And this pays for teachers. It pays for programs like vocational programs that are not fully funded by the state, special education that's not fully funded by the state or by the federal government, paraeducators that may go beyond the prototypical funding model. As you saw, health room staff are funded at a very low rate from the state, and things like school safety, school resource officer, mental health programs, those kinds of things are all things that typically the levy would pay for because they're funded at such a low level from the state. Okay, and then local funds, the capital levy. These are capital improvements to the district, things like improving the buildings. If we have to replace HVAC systems on a large scale, or even in one building for that matter, it can be very expensive. They tend to be bigger projects or small construction projects under a capital levy. And they can also purchase and provide for the maintenance of technology as well. That also falls under a capital levy. In some cases, districts choose to build entire buildings with capital levies. Now, because levies run from 1 to 6 years in this category, if you built a $20 million, not 20 million, let's say a $40 million school is a more realistic number, and you want to pay that through a capital levy, obviously that's going to mean a very high tax rate for the community because it's spread out only for 6 years. People are paying as you go, basically, on something like that. So very few districts do capital levies for big projects or big expensive projects. They tend to pool together smaller projects that are quite expensive, that might not fall under the regular budget, and ask taxpayers to pay for those. And certainly the purchase of technology is one of those things that falls under that. And we've done that successfully for the past 4 years. And then touching on what I just spoke to is the other local piece is when we approve a bond levy, which the Lakewood community did in 2014 for the construction primarily of the high school. These usually go from 12 to 20 years, and they're like paying a mortgage. We sell bonds, and then that levy or that bond levy pays the investors back for the purchase of those bonds, or for the bonds money that we receive from them. And they typically are new school construction or remodeling, buying property, that kind of thing, modernizing schools. And these need to be approved at a 60% plus 1 vote. Unlike levies, which need to be approved at a 50% plus 1. And I think it's important to note that, and this is often a point of confusion, we can't use bond dollars, money that we have collected to pay off bonds, to run the operations of the district. We can't put capital money into our general fund. It's illegal to intermix those funds. So if people say, we got money left from the construction of the high school, we're using that money for more construction because that's the only thing we can, or capital projects, which is the only thing we can spend it on. We cannot spend it on operations. So that was the big picture on levies and bonds, because that's just another component of how we're funded. What we wanted to make sure we talked about just briefly tonight, because this is the board just last week approved a resolution to place a levy proposition on the ballot April 27th. And there's going to be a lot of information coming out about that in the coming days. And we can even share with you if you'd like to look at some of the information already that's on our website right now. But the proposition is a 3-year levy, which is projected to be collected at $1.80 per thousand. The board thought long and hard about this proposition because obviously last year voters did not approve the levy propositions on the ballot in February and August. So it was important, and we've had the pandemic and we've had a lot of uncertainty and hardship. So the board really felt strongly that we should, and we all agree, we needed to give the local taxpayers a break from where we were before. Last year's taxes were $2.18 per thousand. This levy proposition reduces that by 38 cents. It's pretty significant reduction. And last year's levy proposition was at 211 for this year, 209, 206, 204. So those rates are quite a bit lower, and it's only a 3-year proposition. So the total amount that would be collected by 2024 at this point under the current proposition would be $8 million less than what was proposed last year. We all felt it was important that consideration about the community be right at the center of this proposition. It is important to know that when making this decision, we spent a lot of time analyzing the impact of these budget collections on our budget for the coming years. And we really felt strongly that the $1.80 would still allow us to be able to both reinstate what was cut this year and maintain programs moving forward. So this reduction in amount still allows us to maintain quality programs while balancing that against the need to provide more tax relief to the local taxpayers in Lakewood. This is new, and this is something that I've had conversations with a number of people about, and Rob, you are one of those people who shared, well, we really would like to know what the levy pays for exactly. Now, the state has recently required school districts, or actually has required school districts to create subfunds. We see this as an opportunity to identify which programs are being paid for by the levy in the levy subfund. So part of our budget now is actually what is the levy pay for? That didn't used to be the case in school districts, but now it is. This was an opportunity for us to be able to identify what programs are paid for by the levy and exactly how much money each of these programs would, or how much of the levy would go to these programs. And so you can look at this list. I won't read it to you, but this list represents things that we have found to be very high priorities from the Lakewood taxpayers. This was informed in large part by the recent survey that we did to the community in early January. And so we feel strongly that this represents some very powerful interests in the part of the community about what the Lakewood levy should fund. And this list aligns with the priorities that the community shared with us in the survey.
Hey, Scott.
Yes.
This is Rob. I
Yes.
just want to say this is really powerful as far as educating the community and how transparent it is. This is wonderful to see.
Great. Thank you. Thank you for that. And I would say to all of you, Rob, I mean, I think the feedback that we get on what information is really valuable. There is going to be a lot of it this year. always tried to communicate with people, but this year we've just put more resources and time into developing a range of graphs and charts and information that helps people to see what they need to be able to find what they need to find in order to make a decision about voting for the levy, whether it's a yes or no vote. And so if we have time today, I may just show you the web page where we've started to build that, but there's a lot more coming as in the next week or so as we put these kinds of charts and graphs together. So let's go to the next slide. And this is really the last slide because there's the story about what the levy supports. And then there's the reality that if the levy proposition is not approved for 2021, that we would be looking at the $2.5 million in reductions that we're talking about right now and in the coming meetings. But then in 2022-23, we would be facing another cut. As I mentioned, that would be year 3. That would be a $3.4 million cut. And in 2022-23, we will not have the fund balance to soften that much, quite frankly, because we've spent down our fund balance to gradually, because we did have a fund balance, we have had a fund balance that's allowed us to gradually soften it somewhat early on the impact of the levy not passing last year. But that is not going to last. And so we will have another $3.4 million in funding to cut or spending to cut for the following year. So it just underlines the importance of the levy. $6.5 million is just, it's got to come from somewhere or it's got to be cut. So, and that's not, this is just a reality. It's not meant to be something that is a threat. It's just a reality that we all need to be mindful of, and that's hopefully captured in those other charts, especially the previous chart that you just saw, all the important things that it pays for.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Okay, so what are the months again that you can run the levy in April, and what's the other month?
April, August, and November.
So why are you going to run it in April versus August? Because I'm thinking that people in the community, if the kids are not back in school, how's it going to pass?
Well, at this point, we're counting on the kids, at least for as much as we can get them in school, being in school. So that's the first piece, but understanding that we're still in, probably we're going to be looking at a hybrid model in all reality at that point.
Right. So why are they running it in April versus like August, to maybe get people feeling more confident that, okay, my kids are back in school now?
Yeah, there's 2 reasons for that, Annie. One is that statistically, overwhelmingly, April is a better time to run the levy. And one of the main reasons is because a lot of the people who are our yes voters are very busy or not available in August and tend to vote at lower rates. So that's a hard time to run a levy. And statistically, levies are approved at about an 86% rate going back to 1992, and in April. And then in August, they dropped down to 76% approval. And then in November, they dropped down to about 61% approval. And the other reason, and I think this is just as compelling, if not more, considering we're kind of in a weird time right now, is that if we run the levy in April and it passes, we can undo the budget reductions, that we can walk back the budget reductions we've planned and reinstate or not implement those for the fall. If the levy is not approved in April or not run in April, we wouldn't be able to walk back all or even many of those budget reductions in August when it's only a month before school starts. Imagine having staffing reductions of, say, I'm just going to make up a number, but say we've got a number of teachers. Trying to hire teachers back at that point is very difficult. And then obviously November, the school year is well underway at that point. So reinstating programs at that point is very difficult, and in many cases impossible. So that's really where the board's calculus was on running in April for those reasons.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. it's a big question out there in the community, and it's a great question. Yeah.
I'm sure you guys have seen it too, but I saw a list of all the levies that have been up for vote in the last year. And I kind of had the same concerns as Annie, that with schools shut down, some people might have maybe a little more negative perception, but it's a really high number that have passed. It made me feel a little bit more optimistic that it could work, and maybe voters aren't as negative. Maybe it's just some people are noisier, you know, hopefully that's the case. And
yeah, you know, and it was interesting. There were 13 levies that ran in November and during the presidential election, which everybody assumed was going to be an absolutely horrible time, and 13 of them passed. And I don't know the specifics of every school district, but I can bet that most of them were not in person. So it's interesting, you know, what was the messaging, what was the, how was that conveyed to voters? Yes.
This is Rob.
Yep.
I kind of share Annie's thoughts. I'm actually almost floored that the board recommended going with a levy in April for the same reasons she talked about. We see empty parking lots. You know, school is not functioning the way everybody is accustomed to. And then take a look at the angst of the community with those rebellious signs. Lakewood, open the schools. And the fact that we're still in this pandemic, there's still a lot of job uncertainty. I actually am floored that they would go in April versus August, when hopefully more people are vaccinated, we're getting better, school's been open, there's been sports activities, back to some semblance of normalcy, nice weather, positive feelings. I can't express to you how shocked I am that they're going to attempt this.
Yeah, I understand. And we did talk quite a bit about that. And, you know, what we ran across last year was we made a similar assumption when we postponed the election in April. And then by the time we got to August, things had changed so much with the pandemic that we thought we were going to be in a much better place coming back to school in August, and we were in a bad place in August. And so part of our discussion was really around, there's still such a huge amount of uncertainty around August, and then we passed another possible election time, and then we're left with 2 dates. And if August is a bad date, then we're left with just November and only the ability to run it once and not have another opportunity. And so I'm not disagreeing with anything anybody said. It's a very difficult, any date is difficult time to run the levy right now. It's a guess as to what's going to be the best time. But we did try to go with what we know the numbers are going to be, you know, what historical patterns have been to the extent we can, and also the realities of, you know, how the budget works and how we might be able to run a school program in the fall with a levy that's been approved. If we don't have a levy approved in November and we're having to enact budget cuts because the levy hasn't been run in August, we may have you know, so many fewer teachers because of the $2.5 million in budget cuts, that if we have to socially distance in the fall and we don't have a levy approved and we don't have enough teachers to have a full complement of classes to even run in a hybrid, then it could be a very dangerous situation to be in the fall as well, because we may not have enough staffing to even do what we have now. So it's just been it's been really difficult to figure out what the best timing for this. And so our whole hope is that in running in April, we'll be able to get it over the line, combined with the Lakewood Compact conversation about the future and looking to the future of our district and the possibilities coming out of the pandemic of ways that our district can grow. Hopefully then we'll be able to get over the line in April. If not, we still will have August to try it again. But, you know, obviously we want to do it the first time.
Are you 100% confident that on March 29th, the rest of the school, the rest of the students are going to be back in the classroom? Is there going to be like a staff issue, or I'm just assuming that my kid's not going to go back to school at all this year. That's what I think.
Well,
personally.
We have no, I mean, at this point, given the guidance that we've received from the Department of Health and the amount of protection and safety measures that we've put in place, we're pretty confident we're going to be bringing kids back on March 28th. I mean, I can't read the future, but you know, as we all, none of us can, but you know, at this point,
But
we're moving forward with it.
Teachers union saying? What's Mr. Delaney saying? I mean, sorry, no offense to teachers. I think you guys are all wonderful. I mean, my kids have been lucky. They've been blessed with the greatest of the great. My kid's thriving right now online, but there's a lot of people in the community that aren't very happy.
Well, we're moving forward with our plans and figuring out how to come in, how to most safely be in person. Those conversations with the union, with our union leadership have been focused, and with our staff have been focused on how to do it as safely as possible. So we have not had discussion about anything other than that, and how to best navigate the challenges of hybrid models so that it's as effective for kids as it can possibly be. I have felt like we've had very fruitful conversations and planning with our staff.
Okay.
And I will say it's been unlike many other districts.
Well, I'm glad my kid is in a small district for sure.
What other questions do you have about levies or funding, anything along those lines?
Hey, Scott, I have a question. We have all this extra staffing to do the our K2, having smaller class sizes and going for the 4 days. Where's that extra money coming from to support those extra teachers?
It's coming from our fund balance this year. What we recognized, and this is part of what how we're planning all across the board, we have an immediate situation we have to deal with, which is getting kids in school and getting them the very most we can give them. K2, we were, because they're the youngest learners, we decided, and we had a certain amount of space in our elementary schools to support it. We made sure that we would get, we made it a priority to get the K2 back in 4 days a week for full days and have the staff to do it and still socially distance. Unfortunately, we don't have the space, you know, or the capacity to do that K-12. It just isn't, we just don't have it, but we wanted to do it where we could.
So are we getting any kind of funding as we're going through this pandemic? And is that funding just for like PPE and safety protocols? Or are we getting any extra funding to support those extra staff or any other things that schools need trying to teach in this new way during the pandemic?
So we have received funding in the fall. Sarah can talk a little more about how much. It was a little over 200,000, but we got some CARES money the first time around, which paid for PPE upgrades to our HVAC system so that we could again have that layer of protection for staff and students. And David Parks was part of that project, actually, I believe. And then, you know, we bought the PPE, we've, you know, purchased additional technology and so on to accommodate students in the remote learning model. So that money has been spent. Unlike many districts, we actually spent all of it right away because we had needs to address. We're also going to be getting some ESSER 2 money, which is additional funding from the federal government, and that's a little over $700,000. That has not come to us yet. We have to spend that on certain things, and then we then get reimbursed for that from the state. That money flows through the state to us for specific things like equipment, you know, mitigation of the impacts of COVID, recovery efforts to provide for learning gaps that have been created over the course of the pandemic. But there are strings tied to that money. But we do have it, and we're that's why we're able to think about our budget in a fairly normal way, even though there's these additional costs, because that additional money has been spent for the reasons that it was provided and will be. And it's helped a lot. Sarah, do you want to add more to that?
Just, yeah, the CARES money that we got, it was like 199,000. And yeah, we already spent that. We concluded back in October. So that money, we received it. And that one's done with. So the second amount that we're going to be receiving, the CARES, to what Scott was saying, we're going to have strings attached to that one. We need to make sure that we spend it appropriately. We don't get the allocation up front. We have to spend the money first and then claim it at the state level. So we have until 23, I think, the end of the school year in 23. So we do have time to spend it based on what our obligations are, but with only 600,000 to 700,000, I'm assuming it's going to go pretty quickly with the needs that we have.
Scott, if you don't mind, do you have a roundabout figure of what the total cost of running the levy is?
I don't have that amount, but Sarah, do you have a ballpark?
Yeah, the election cost about $20,000, I believe, last year when we ran in February. It's essentially the county gets the whole cost of the election and then they divide it out amongst all the participants. So it depends on how many people are on the ballot is our share. And then we also have some other costs for, Scott was talking about the team that we have helping us out with the levy this year.
So it probably wouldn't exceed, say, 25,000.
About that, maybe a little bit more.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Another reason why we want to get it over the line once the first time.
Well, my thinking was, and I'm not going to change my opinion because it's just an opinion, not a fact, but I think the timing of this is ill-fated. But for $20,000 or $25,000, that's not the end of the world. It would be a collection of a whole lot of lessons learned if it does fail. A chance to go back and get feedback and assess the community, kind of like polling a jury after a verdict, and find out why they didn't pass it, why they didn't want to approve it, and then bring it up again in August.
Yeah. Good point. Okay. Any other questions or comments? Really appreciate everything that you've said and everything that you've asked about this. It's important that we have these conversations. That's why you're here.
I have another question also. So on the money that the state says that they allocate you per student, do they actually give you that amount that they really say, or do they fully fund that amount that they say that they're going to give you?
So they fund it by our annual average enrollment. So if our enrollment goes up or down throughout the year, the numbers will change. And then what they do is every month they give you percent. Like in 1 month, they'll give you 8% of that total year's allocation. The other will be 10. When there's levy collections, they'll give you a little bit less because they know you're going to be getting some local money. So beyond, or for the entire year, it's 100%, but they chunk it out throughout the year. And that number goes up and down based on your enrollment every month because we take enrollment every first day of the month.
Okay. That's kind of tricky for a budget.
Yeah, yes.
Always moving.
Yep.
Scott, I do have one question.
Sure, David.
Is there any recognized savings through this past year that can be pushed forward into this new year? For example, I know people have, with the school not fully operating, right, there's assumptions that there's some savings being made. Granted, there's been other measures that aren't anticipated, that through PPE, through all the computers that have been dispersed and whatnot. So just a basic question, is there anything that has been minimized this year that to one way or another can be pushed forward into the next year? I know budgets can be use it or lose it, but just something to get some feedback on.
Yeah. So, I think, David, to your point, what we've done with our budget, and I've mentioned this a couple of times in different ways, and this is, I think, addresses at least in part what you're talking about. We have a fund balance in our district. I've had a fund balance in anticipation of the hardships that were forthcoming last year. We did spend quite a bit of, put quite a bit of effort into allowing our fund balance to grow in anticipation of needs this year. So we did that last year. What has happened that's contributed to the problems this year is that while many of the additional costs that we've had have been offset by federal funding, we have decreased, our revenue has gone down this year and will go down significantly. For example, in transportation, the way the transportation formula works, we actually will have about $500,000 less in funding that we would normally have in transportation this year. And I mean, that's a very rough number, but that's the magnitude that we're talking about. And then because of the way that the formula the following year is used to calculate some money the following year, it's based on how much was allocated the previous year to kind of be basic. So the $500,000 that was reduced this year in transportation money, we're now going to get around another $500,000 hit, or we're anticipating another $500,000 hit in the fall on transportation. So where we've really taken our hit is in revenue. And as a result, we've had to spend our fund balance. We still will have a fund balance that we can spend next year, which is why we're not making, $3.5 million or $4 million in cuts now. We're going to be spending our fund balance down again next year, but we'll really be able to draw it down only about $2 million next year. And then we'll be at the end of the board policy. We have to maintain a 7% fund balance by board policy. We'll really be approaching that limit at the end of next year. But which will require us to make cuts in additionally the following year. So we have kind of pushed forward revenue, savings of the fund balance where we can in order to offset costs over a period of 3 years. I hope that speaks.
That seriously, I appreciate you taking the effort time to come back to it. I know you probably messaged it through a different way, but that spoke a little bit more clearly.
Yeah, it wasn't
clearly to me to understand.
Yeah, I didn't speak to it that way before. You're right. So I'm glad to do it.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I have a question.
I've got a question.
So let's see. I think Jenny jumped in first. Jenny, you want to go first?
Sorry.
Okay.
So I have a quick question. Planning for the following school year, are we planning for a hybrid model again? That seems like it would change the needs that you're looking at when it comes to staffing and programming. Or are you going to kind of have two scenarios?
Right now we're planning. I mean, essentially, if we're in a hybrid model, we're going to have the same staffing, but we would be in a position to adjust the amount of time the kids are in school, like we're talking about now. So we would continue to maintain generally the same staffing in order to accommodate the hybrid or the traditional in-person model. Either way, that's more of a scheduling change than it is a staffing issue. But recognizing that if there are $2.5 million of budget cuts, that does change the formula significantly. If you're looking at classes of 38 at the high school, for example, because of staffing reductions, now you're at the point where you may have to, in a hybrid model, have 19 kids in a classroom. And the scary part about that is that's more than the capacity of our classrooms would allow with social distancing. So that creates a big problem if we don't have the funding that we have now. So because we at least need to maintain the staffing we have in order to do a hybrid.
Got it.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
I had a question for Sarah. Is there any ability to refinance the bond on the high school at a lower interest rate and gain some income or save some money that way?
Yeah, that's a great question. We've actually been in contact with our bond council over the last year. And what they're showing us is, yes, we could refinance, but the way that the market's going right now, it would benefit us to get closer to our call date, which I believe is in 2024. So the biggest gain and the best bang for our buck essentially would be to wait until that call date so that we can maximize our savings. So we're going to do it once because it costs money, like refinancing a home, to refinance the bond. So we want to make sure that we're doing the best we can for the taxpayers.
Yeah. And the difference is millions of dollars.
Millions, yeah.
Yeah, and we really would rather have the taxpayers have the larger benefit.
Yeah, I think it was
That's a great question, Anna, because it's something that we've been talking a lot about. What's the best time to do that?
Thank you. Thanks for answering that.
Of course.
Okay, well, I just want to thank you all for the questions that you've asked and the views that you've shared tonight. I'm looking forward to seeing all of you, well, I guess on the 18th or around the 18th, or excuse me, the 11th, you'll be getting together in your small groups. Just know that some of the groups, you may not meet at the time that's indicated on the time schedule that I sent out. That's okay. If there's a time that works better for your group to come together and talk about the priorities in your area, then that's fine. The facilitators of each group will reach out to you. I know in facilities, that's Dale, and athletics and activities, that's Dan. In staff, program staffing and administration, that's me. And for teaching and learning, that will be Brian. So, you'll hear from your facilitators on that. And, I'm looking forward to hearing what comes of those conversations. No, tomorrow you will get the PowerPoint. We will also, this has also been recorded, so people can listen to this discussion if they would like to, and we'll post that on our website so that folks can know what we talked about tonight and the questions that you asked.
Hey, Scott, I've got a quick question. I assume when we show up for our subcommittee meetings, somebody has already given each committee a goal because they're not going to be equal budgets. So kind of a target that each of us needs to.
Yes, that's kind of the work that the administrative team has got to do in the next couple of weeks. We're going to come with our best thinking in terms of proposals to you and your committee, but you will also have alternatives that you will be looking at that will have dollar amounts associated with them so that you can look at what we're proposing, hear the rationale for the proposal, but you can also look at the alternatives, understand what those alternatives are, and give your input on how we might rearrange those priorities within that group. And you will have a goal, so you'll know kind of how moving one thing will impact the total goal that you have. So it's a little bit of an art. We've got to figure out kind of how that all plays out, because we've got to actually look at numbers to see how that works in the next couple of weeks as we plan this. But yes, you're right on the money. And then you will make those recommendations and we'll put it all together and in the end and come back to you with the big picture. Okay. Well, again, thank you very much. I hope you guys have a great evening and we will be in touch. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Bye.
Yep. Bye-bye.